Here we are now moving into chapter 16 and doing, of course, the first subsection, 16.1, on something called supply-side policy. So what is supply-side policy? Well, let's go through a historical example that illustrates why we even want to talk about supply-side stuff instead of demand-side stuff, which we have been talking about before. The problem that popped up in the 1970s was a period of economic conditions called stagflation, which is a combination of a stagnating economy with lots of unemployment and an inflationary economy with lots of inflation. So both things were happening at the same time. Lots of unemployment and lots of inflation. Now, the traditional policy solution, or the policy lever, if you'll use that metaphor that we talked about before, was to shift the aggregate demand curve to solve the problem. But you notice, in this particular problem, that won't work. Well, it won't work for the entire problem. Let's take a look at our sub-bullet points. What if we increase the aggregate demand curve to reduce unemployment? Well, we could do that, right? We could stimulate the economy by lowering interest rates by the Federal Reserve, expanding the money supply. That would stimulate the economy, lower the unemployment rate. But if you already have inflation and you add extra money supply to the system, well, we already know what's going to happen, right? Inflation will rise. So out of the entire problem of stagflation, increasing aggregate demand only solves half the problem. It solved the unemployment problem, but only at the cost of stimulating the inflation problem even worse. So that's not a solution. Well, what if we did the exact opposite? Let's attack the inflation problem. We know how to do that. Using aggregate demand, we could reduce aggregate demand. The Federal Reserve, for instance, could do the different policies that lower the money supply. And that would, of course, put downward pressure on prices, wouldn't it? Unfortunately, if you lower the money supply, that drives up interest rates, scares away homeowners from buying new houses. That, of course, makes the economy not do as well, and unemployment rises. So we solved the problem of the inflation, but only by aggravating the already bad unemployment problem even worse. So the point I want you all to recognize is stagflation raised a new issue to think about that the traditional tool of aggregate demand curve shifting will not solve. So let's take a look at the Keynesian view of the problem. The Keynesians see the aggregate supply curve, which is the blue line right here, and turning, it looks like an L on its side. You notice the horizontal section is the interesting section for right now. The horizontal section says if we start at aggregate demand curve level 1, and that gives us output Q1, we are way below what's called Q star, and that's the Q with the asterisk on it. Q star, by definition, is the production capacity level of the economy. That would mean the economy is humming along at full output. All workers who want a job are employed, and so we don't have an unemployment problem. And so the economy is operating at its full capacity. At Q1, we're obviously operating at way below full capacity. So there's lots of unemployed workers. So what this graph tells us, if the Federal Reserve stimulates the economy by printing excess money supply and aggregate demand shifts from aggregate demand curve 1 up to aggregate demand curve 2, what we have is a major increase in output and simultaneously a major decrease in unemployment, but no change in the price level, so no inflationary problems. Until, of course, you reach Q star. Once you're already at full employment and you stimulate the economy even further to, say, aggregate demand curve 3, you notice the output can't increase past Q star by definition. I mean, Q star is the output capacity of the economy. So if you continue stimulating the economy, what do you get instead? You stay at Q star level of output, but you notice you're way above P1 at this point. So the Keynesian view is as long as you have substantial unemployment, you can shift the aggregate demand curve and get a positive output response, but not have to have any inflation in the process. Now, the monetarist view is a long-run view. The monetarists really don't pay much attention to the short run. Their focus is on the long run. And what they see is that the aggregate supply curve is vertical in the long run based on what we see here called Qn. Qn is the natural rate of output, which corresponds with the potential or the total level of output that the economy is capable of. Okay, so it can't go beyond Qn because that would mean everyone's already fully employed and there's no extra output to be had. So the view of monetarists is, if you stimulate the economy, as we see here in the graphs, aggregate demand curve 4 gets stimulated to be higher at aggregate demand curve 5, you get no extra output because there's no room on the x-axis to move. All you do is move vertically on the price level axis, and you get inflation with no increase in output. So as you might suspect, monetarists are rather leery of the Federal Reserve trying to stimulate the economy. And then we have what's called the hybrid version. So economists now don't take either extreme Keynesian or monetarist view. They see the aggregate supply curve as having a curved shape to it, as you can see in this graph. You notice on the far left side of the graph, the Keynesian segment is labeled, is relatively flat. So during this particular segment, if you stimulated the economy, you would get a large increase in output, but not a very large increase in prices, if any increase in prices. But as you keep moving farther and farther to the right, which is being measured in output levels, once you finally go far enough to the right, you will eventually hit the Q star or the QN, which is the output level, the output capacity of your society. And if you keep stimulating the economy beyond that, what you end up getting, of course, is the increasing prices that the monetarists worried about. So what the hybrid curve does is it combines both graphs and essentially puts a medium section in there where you get a combination of both increasing output and increasing prices, with the prices increasing exponentially as you keep trying to push output farther and farther to the right. This gives us the concept of an inflation-unemployment trade-off. Now remember, with a trade-off, you gain one thing, but you lose another. Okay? So this particular trade-off, the inflation-unemployment trade-off, has a name. It's called the Phillips curve, named after a very famous economist, A.W. Phillips. Now what he suggested was we have an inflation-unemployment trade-off, which means if we stimulate the economy and are willing to tolerate more inflation, we can lower the unemployment rate. But if we wanted to lower the inflation rate instead, we would have to accept a higher unemployment rate. So Phillips essentially put together these ideas that you have this trade-off between inflation and unemployment. In this particular graph, in this particular set of slides, we now have graphs that show what we're talking about. On the left-hand side, we have the aggregate supply curve and the aggregate demand curves. And you notice this is a hybrid one, right? And so as we stimulate the economy from AD1 to AD2, we get a combination of two things. Real output increases from A to B. You can see horizontally, we are moving horizontally, which is the real output axis, but we're also simultaneously moving up on prices, aren't we? So we're getting a stimulant, we stimulate the economy, we get more output and higher prices. And as you see, as we continue stimulating the economy, this trade-off gets worse and worse. We still get increases in output, but the increase in prices start to dominate. Now, if we translate this from output to unemployment, and let's think logically, so you see on both of these graphs, on the x-axis, we've changed the name. In the left-hand one, it's real output, measured in quantity of goods and services. On the right-hand graph, we're measuring unemployment. So if we go from, let's go to the the output level graph on the far left. So we stimulate the economy with aggregate demand increases from AD1 to AD2. That moves the economy from point A to point B. That would be what? Increasing output and increasing prices. On the unemployment graph, what would it do? Well, moving from A to B looks like we're going backwards on the graph. But remember, the graph is not measuring output, it's measuring unemployment. As output increases, what does unemployment do? Decreases. So this particular graph is just simply translating the information on the output graph into an unemployment graph, because unemployment is something people really care about, so that's what Phillips wanted to highlight. So you notice as we stimulate the economy with aggregate demand, from aggregate demand curve 1 to aggregate demand curve 2 to aggregate demand curve 3, we are getting increases in output, but also simultaneously increases in inflation. And on the unemployment graph, we are moving from point A to B to C, just like we did on the previous graph, only now we're talking about as we stimulate the economy, we would expect that the inflation rate to rise as the unemployment rate falls. Now, this brings up the concept of the inflationary flashpoint. The inflationary flashpoint is the point on the hybrid aggregate supply curve where you start to see a rapid increase in slope. Remember what the slope is telling us. The slope, as it goes more vertical, says the x-axis will only increase a little bit, but the y-axis number will increase a lot. Whereas on the far left side of this exact same aggregate supply curve graph, you see it's relatively flat. You can have large increases in x-axis numbers, which are real output, with only small number increases in the price level. But once you get to the inflationary flash point, you finally reach the point where the curve starts to increase exponentially. So therein lies the problem. You don't want to push beyond the inflationary flash point because you'll start to trigger large amounts of inflation, but only small amounts of real output change, so you don't get much of a decrease in unemployment beyond this point.